We need a climate of peace. The next generation has been forced to step up and raise their voices. Legendary labor leader Dolores Huerta said, "Every moment is an organizing opportunity. Every person a potential activist. Every minute a chance to change the world." Alexia Leclercq is an organizer in Austin, Texas and New York City, and co-founder of START, Empowerment, a nonprofit that educates teachers and students about social justice, education, and combats environmental racism. Last year, she won the prestigious Brower Youth Award for Environmental Leadership. She is a force to be reckoned with. Please welcome Alexia Leclercq.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for having me. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about myself and my work and giving a presentation that I titled Environmental Justice Education as a Vehicle for World Peace. So a little bit about myself. My name is Alexia. I use she, they pronouns. I'm 22 years old and I'm a grassroots environmental justice organizer, as well as the co-founder of a nonprofit named Start Empowerment and the Colorado River Conservancy. I've been working in the environmental justice space for a long time now and have worked on a variety of issues, from passing national legislation to addressing water rights, pollution, and my curriculum has reached over 120,000 people. And I've also recently served as one of the UN Youth Ambassadors. And so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about world peace. It seems like a really large topic, right? When you think about it, everyone wants to promote world peace, but it's harder to think about what it actually looks like and in practice, and what are tangible actions we take towards world peace. And when I was little, I used to ask my mom, why is there so much suffering in the world? And she would always answer that, when you think about how a family or a community cannot find peace, how can we ever expect there to be world peace? And so that made me really realize how the micro is connected to the macro and how each individual matters and each individual action matters. And so that brings me to education. Education is so critical because it shapes who we are. Both, education formally at a school and the cultural education that we receive at home through our communities and the ancestral knowledge that we carry. That shapes our values, our responsibilities, and what we do on this planet. And so for me, a lot of my education came from my mom, who is Taiwanese, and a mix of her beautiful culture, which is a mix of Hakka, Hoklo, indigenous Taiwanese, and Buddhist culture. And a lot of that value of how to respect the land or respect each other and how to be selfless and serve one another is still something that I think about in my day-to-day basis and in the things that I do with my career. And that was really a contrasting experience to what I had received at school, attending public school in Texas, where a lot of the education was actually a little bit racist. Which brings me to talk a little bit about a brief overview of education in the United States. So education isn't neutral. There's always something that is being said, right? Whether it's positive or it's negative, whether it's critical or not. And the education in the system in the United States was expanded for white Americans in order to build nationalism as the country was developing. And at the same time, indigenous people were put in boarding schools, enacting a cultural genocide, and they were trying to disrupt their ties to the land in order to continue colonizing. And then Black people were not allowed to have access to education. And this was done in the, very purposefully done in order to build the nation. And today you still see those impacts in the educational system. You see the disparities in test scores and educational outcomes, but then also the disparities in access to education and access to quality education. And one of my favorite quotes is from Paulo Freire, and it says that education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes a practice of freedom. So when I look at education, I see the opportunity to maintain the status quo, or the opportunity to use education as a tool to train and to create young change makers. And that brings me to talk about my work. So my work focuses on climate education and environmental justice education, because the climate crisis is one of the biggest issues of our lifetime. And it can be argued that it is the defining issue of our lifetime, right? And if it hasn't yet, it's going to impact everyone. And then another category that I want to talk about is environmental racism. That term specifically is used to describe the disproportionate pollution burden on communities of color, on low-income communities, and communities in the global South. So when I was in school, that wasn't something that was focused on or taught. When we talked about climate change, we briefly talked about polar bears, which I care about and everyone does, but we didn't talk about the real impacts of the climate crisis today, right? Like we see in Jackson, Mississippi, there is no clean water, or the recent floods in Pakistan that are happening right now. These are some of the present issues that are impacting those that are most marginalized in society. And that is why I created Start Empowerment, my organization. And so our goal is to bring environmental justice education to public schools and community centers across the United States, because it's something that's not talked about. In 2019, I actually attended this exposition where they had hundreds of environmental education programming. And they were all really incredible, but they only focused on the science, which is important, but none of them focus on kind of the social political aspect of the climate crisis as a human-made crisis and a human-made problem. Because we cannot separate our economic, social economic systems with the climate crisis. We have built an economy in which is based on the exploitation of the planet and the exploitation of people in order to continue to make profit. And so I went with my friend Kier, who's the other co-founder, and we wrote an introduction curriculum to environmental justice, kind of talking about capitalism, talking about colonialism, talking about a lot of the root causes, and talking about how social justice and climate justice are tied together, right? For example, Indigenous people make up less than 5% of the world's population, but protect 80% of biodiversity. Or rich countries that have historically caused the most harm are the ones that are disproportionately less impacted by pollution and by the climate crisis. Or that, you know, in the United States, zoning laws were purposefully created to place polluting industry in communities of color, leading to disproportionately high rates of cancers and health issues. And all these different examples, right? Like, for example, the war in Iraq, where the US went in there for the purpose of getting oil, results in a lot of death and a lot of suffering and a lot of destruction. And so when I thought about all these big issues, I really thought about how can we start combating those at the local level. And so it started with education, with that curriculum that I created that I was able to implement at one school, and that teachers then became more interested. And I was able to implement at multiple schools. And then from that curriculum, students were interested in taking action in their community. So one of the issues that we focused on was food insecurity and food justice. And so students started gardening, and they started, you know, doing aquaponics and hydroponics and figuring out how to get those fresh fruits and vegetables to their local community, and also how to educate their peers on food justice, how that connected to climate justice, and what they could do to get involved. And then from there, we started building, we started doing workshops at different organizations, and we started funding programs at schools and in community centers to empower youth, to get them that education about environmental justice, but then also the social political skills to you go into that field, whether it's through organizing, passing legislation, and then also providing funding for youth to be able to take action. And some, you know, incredible work has come out of that. You know, we have youth that are fighting the Brooklyn Pipeline, that are, you know, leading gardens, that are leading strikes across the United States, and that are really, you know, taking this into their own hands. And when people ask me, what do we do with such a big issue? For me, it really always goes back to grassroots organizing. Once we have that education about what the issue is, how it's impacting different people, and how we can take action, I think it's important for change to come from the grassroots and to build that people power, which is what I've also been involved with, with fighting aggregate mining operations and passing local legislation and water quality testing. And one person can make such a huge impact at the local level, and then you amplify that. And then things start happening at the state level, at the national level, and across different countries. And so local work, something that is really critical and something that matters a lot and something that needs to be talked about. And our education is consistently tied with that community work. It is not separate from action, it is together. And so kind of going back to the idea of world peace, it's a big concept, but I think about it for myself, I break it down into two pieces. I think about myself as an individual, how I can cultivate peace within me, and inner peace and healing, and then how I can bring that to the community level, with my family, with my friends, with my community, how I can care for them and for Mother Earth, and how I can center justice in my day-to-day activity. And then I think from there, it can ripple, the effects can ripple to the world. And so lastly, I want to leave y'all with two of my favorite quotes. So the first one is, "Hope is a discipline." And I think that quote is really important because when we are in a world with so much suffering and facing so many issues, and the climate crisis is this impending and present disastrous issue, it is important to think about the little ways we practice hope on a day-to-day basis. And those are the things that bring me joy as well. And then the second quote is that now is a discipline. I think it's also really important to stay in the present moment because that is what's real, and think about in the present moment how you can cultivate peace within yourself, but also in your community, and what actions you can do on a day-to-day basis to contribute to the solution. And please join me in signing the petition to establish the United Nations Peace Education Day.